and thanks for joining us for another episode of Mid-American Gardener. I'm your host, Tanisha Spain, and joining me in the studio today are Ella and Shane, here to talk about all things green and growing. So let's have them introduce themselves and tell you a little bit more about their specialty, and then we'll get started. So Ella, we'll start with you.
Thanks. I'm Ella Maxwell. I'm a horticulturist and a master gardener up in the Tazewell County area. And I have a large yard, and I really like perennials and trees and shrubs.
And you managed to find some green this time of year.
I did.
That's exciting.
Yes.
All right, Shane.
Hi, I'm Shane Cultra. I'm from Country Arbors Nursery, and I've recently retired from daily operations, but I am a lifetime nurseryman, and I've worked in the trade since I was in high school. And so I've been on the show since the 90s. So I've been here aging gracefully here on the panel, answering questions, and I can continue to do so.
Awesome. All right. So you brought lots of stuff to share.
Yes, I did.
Let's get into it.
I brought some evergreen ground covers. So if you're thinking about having something, you know, that's going to look nice through the winter, there's a number of different ones. And so I just brought a couple of them. And now none of these are truly native. And so for our native people, sometimes some of these can get a little out of control. But the first one is a juga, and this is carpet bugle or whatever you want to call it. But it's very just low to the ground, and it comes in lots of colors now. There's a feather kind of series where there's some yellows and variegation and whatever. And then I have some of the vinca periwinkle, and of course it has little blue flowers in the spring. And again, this one can spread. It has little underground roots and pops up all over the place. And of course, the English ivy as well.
Bulletproof.
That's right. Yeah, you've got to. I aggressively trim it off of my house because I don't want it climbing up. So, and again, it can just got to stay on top of it because it can creep out into your grass. And another one that I like a lot is the Pachysandra. This is Japanese Pachysandra. This has some little flower buds for next year. It'll have a white flossy kind of little flower, and it makes a really nice evergreen ground cover as well. And then there are a couple of plants that are perennials, and this is an epimedium, and it has some evergreen foliage to it as well. Now I do have a couple varieties or different species that are deciduous, that they have a fall color and then they die. The leaves are, you know, brown and dead looking, but these go through the winter, as do the hellebores. So in the next round, I'm going to talk about one of the hellebores, Hellebore niger, that is blooming now. Its leaf is a little bit different than this orientalis, but fun things to add winter interest in your garden.
Question. Now, these are not covered in your yard other than maybe by some leaves.
Right. Correct.
So how do you do anything for them, with them? Do you have to water in the winter? What is the maintenance?
This is the best thing about them. You don't really have to do anything. Now, these two that I showed, the epimedium and the hellebore, this foliage is from last year. So this foliage will be replaced, and I usually I trim this off early in the spring before they begin to bloom. And with this one, I just use a weed whacker and kind of go over the top of it and lightly rake it out. But you could leave it and let the new foliage just come out over the top.
Excellent. Okay.
Yep.
And I can tell from the plants that that's mostly a shady area, because almost everything you had was more shade oriented.
Right. That is true. Although a lot of these ground covers, as aggressive as they are, they can grow in the sun too. Maybe not these two perennials, the epimedium or the hellebores, but certainly the other ground covers.
I could gradually tell by, as you were adding, I go, well, that could be anywhere, that could be anywhere, and then I go, okay, now we're getting towards shade.
Yes, because
I have all the great stuff in the winter that you can have in the shade. So because people are always looking for shade plants, and you just gave a whole selection of great shade plants.
Thank Thank you.
All
I know
right.
people are at home frantically taking notes on
Oh, sure.
those that they want to have in their yard next year.
There you go.
So it's January, and pruning is a thing, or will be soon. We're kind of getting up to that winter pruning time. And so Shane, you shared some pictures.
Yeah,
and
so this is a time of year that it was a little warmer than normal, and you're always looking outside thinking, is there anything I can do to get ahead of the spring, or just something to be outside? And we had some decent days. And so the first thing that I'll tell people is, yeah, take advantage of it and get ahead. And you just need to ask yourself, what am I accomplishing? How am I going to add or detract from the flowering in the spring? How am I going to affect the shape, and how am I going to affect the health? Well, at this point in time, you're not going to affect the health, really. Everything's dormant. Everything in Illinois, in the Midwest, is pretty much dormant. So you're going to be good. So the next question to ask yourself is, how am I going to affect the flowering? So the worst thing you can do is cut off flowers that you could have enjoyed. So if that happens, you only lost some flowers. You're not going to hurt the plant. But dogwood is a perfect example. Dogwood has set up the flowers for next year. So this is a picture at my house of a dogwood that I planted recently, and it has little buds set. They're just starting to swell a little bit, but you can see them coming on. And so anything I trim will take off flowers in the spring. So in those particular cases, I like to wait till a plant that's going to bloom in the early spring to go ahead and bloom. And then once it's bloomed, that's a really good time to trim. So that's the case with almost any plant. The best time to trim is after it's bloomed. Let it do its thing, enjoy it, and then go ahead and give it a hard trim. That works almost 99.9% of the time. And so that's the next thing that I'm showing is, this is a dwarf lilac. This is a really nice lilac. It's been there 15 years. It's only 3 by 3. But it does have flower set coming on. I can already see flower buds forming for next year, which you don't see in lilacs too much, but for some reason it does have them. So I don't normally have to trim it, but if I'm going to shape it, I'm going to wait for that to bloom, and then as soon as it's done on any of my lilacs, I'm going to go back and trim them. So I'm going to leave them alone now, because why would I take away from flowers that I'm going to enjoy? The next one is this. This is an issue. When your evergreens get too big, like this one at my front door, the UPS and the Amazon guy is walking sideways as he comes in there. Does not have growth underneath. So the best time to trim these is after the new growth has come on. So you get these nice new candles, you can trim those down. But I've let it get too big. So if I take that back hard all the way to my sidewalk, I'm gonna have open, bare spots. So I can trim it and keep it that size every year, and that's what I've done. But I have some decisions to make, and a lot of people will have those same decisions. Do I want to get rid of that plant? Do I want to have the Amazon person walking sideways? Right now, I've agreed to let them walk sideways for a little while. So
there's no coming back from this.
There's no coming back.
Kind of creates
You can
that.
only maintain them. You cannot take
wow.
them back harder. Some people will play the game like I do sometimes, where I'll take it back hard, and if it leafs out a little bit or put some more needles on, then I'll keep it. And if it doesn't, I was going to tear it out anyway. But almost every time I tear it out anyway.
Now, how long does it take, not to shame you,
Yeah,
but how long does it take to get out of pocket
Well, I
like
planted
this?
that one in 17 years ago.
Okay.
So I've had a great run.
You
But I
did.
could have easily, with any kind of, a cobbler's son has no shoes. I could have easily kept that trimmed. It would have taken me 5 or 10 minutes a year, but no customer of mine wants me to shame them and say, why didn't you just keep it trimmed?
Yes.
And I can tell you why, because I didn't. So
Yeah.
I didn't do it either, and I know better. So
Right.
this is my backyard. This is out my backyard. And one of the fortunate things of me being a nurseryman is I planted a tree in my backyard that it doesn't look that big because of scale, but I can't put my arms around that oak tree.
Wow.
And that oak tree does need to be trimmed. And so I limb it up, and now is a perfect time to limb it up. I'll start taking off the smaller, lower limbs. The winter's a great time to do that. So any of your trees, except the blooming ones like we talked earlier, it's a pretty good time to trim. Most people get around to them in March, but if you can get it this time of year, go ahead and work on your trees. It's not going to hurt them at all.
Now, for this one, would you call someone in to do this, or would you do it yourself?
I personally can do it myself just because I am a professional. The bigger stuff like removal, I definitely call in people
Yes. Okay.
with equipment. It's just what you feel comfortable and safe is really the important part.
And did you want to do this one now or come back?
Yes, you want to go ahead and answer that question?
Yeah, let's do it.
I'll hog the time. But
Okay.
So we've got a question that's asking about why their hydrangea does not bloom.
Yes.
And we've decided over 20 years that that's the most asked question here.
It is.
It is.
Why does my hydrangea not bloom? So I'm going to kill two birds or two hydrangeas with one stone here. And so there are several different types of hydrangeas. There's hydrangeas that bloom only on new growth. There's hydrangeas that only grow on old growth. And then there's new cultivars that grow on both. And the problem with a lot of people is they don't know which one they have. So ones that bloom only on the old wood, if they die back to the ground and only start the next year with new wood and new growth, they're never going to bloom. And that's a lot of the macrophylla hydrangeas. I always say if it's got a round flower, it's for the sun, and it's probably it could be any of the kind. So you really don't know. If it's all white, it's almost always the other kind, the arborescens that's next to it. Okay. So if it's pure white, it's the kind that blooms only on new wood, which makes it nice and easy, and you can trim it anytime. You notice I left the flowers on that one. I enjoy the flowers, and I know I don't have to worry about anything. I'm going to trim that to the ground in the spring, completely to the ground, and it's going to grow beautiful flowers and new growth next year. The one to the right, I have lazily done nothing. I should be putting the leaves around it and the mulch on top of it to protect it, because it only blooms on that wood that you're seeing, and if it gets a little bit colder, that's going to burn off.
Okay.
And I still have time, and I'm probably still not going to do it.
We love the honesty, because we're not going to do it either.
But there's nothing more exciting than once every 7 years for it to bloom beautifully.
Once every 7 years, he says.
It has not bloomed in a long time, but when I get that bloom, it's just so special. So
All right.
But I know that's the case, and I know that's what's happening. And so every time I see that, it reminds me that I know why the customers aren't doing it, but I know and I don't do it. So my
at least
job
you can
here
be sympathetic
is to
us.
tell you have an opportunity to have blooms. The newer varieties say that they bloom on both. The older wood blooms much better than the newer wood. So the newer ones are better, much better. That one was planted 17 years ago as well. So I didn't have that opportunity back then.
Okay, I have a couple of questions.
Yeah.
One, the one on the left, we just moved recently, and I have these in our yard, but they're on more of like a tree.
Yeah, so that's...
Oh, that's a different one.
So there's one more that I didn't send in the picture. So there's a third variety that is exactly more, it's more of it can take a lot more sun. Sorry, so these are more shade oriented. The round ones are shade, the pointy are sun. That's how I tell. If you don't know your hydrangeas, look at the flower shape.
Panicle?
Panicle, that's right.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, and any of the panicle types can take a little more sun and actually prefer a little bit more sun. But those don't die back so hard. Those are really good at taking a hard winter. So they'll stay at 6 and 7 feet tall and not die to the ground. Just a little bit tougher plant. And I have one of those at my front that's quite nice, that gets a little bit of sun. And those are the kind when you have a house that has one side with a ton of sun and a lot of shade on each side, and you want to plant matching things. Those panicle types do well. Now they're going to be different sizes because of the sun, but they'll both live to match up to each other.
Do you have these too at your house?
I do.
All of the above? Or?
I have all of the above. I don't have very many macrophyllas because, again, it requires protection. It's the same way if you have a butterfly bush, you have to give it extra protection. If you're trying to do crepe myrtles, maybe someday in the future, if we get climate change even more drastic, because we just moved, I think, half of a zone.
We did.
Yeah. So,
Who would have thought that the earth would catch us before we developed cultivars? Like,
who would have
the
thought?
earth is moving quicker in temperatures, and we're developing cultivars to meet the temperature requirements.
Oh,
Who would have
boy.
thought that? But there's lots of opportunity of different types of plants, and that's why we all plant so many hydrangeas, because there really is a hydrangea for almost every case in every house, especially newer homes. This is the east side. When my house, I was in the middle of a cornfield when I planted those. This is the final one. This is the ornamental grass. This is a question we get often asked here: is when should we trim it? And in my case, if you leave that foliage, it helps protect it, right? So it's all about protecting it for the winter and coming back. And this one is a miscanthus, a variegated miscanthus. It's a really beautiful plant. and everything stays. So the only time I'll ever trim is if it's blowing and breaking off so bad that all the junk's getting in my neighbor's yard. I'm trying to be a kind neighbor. But this one stays up and stays there. So I just let it stay, and then in the spring, as soon as we see any signs of green, I'll cut it back to the ground. If I were to cut it back now, it's just exposing it. I would need to put more mulch on it. I would need to add to it. So I'm going to let it do its own job. I'll let it protect itself, kind of like what we had here with all the different plants, kind of catching the leaves and catching its own little blanket.
And from all of you, I have learned the value of just sort of having something to look at in the winter. You know, a light dusting of snow, or just it gives you something to look at.
Think about, I say this to the clients and customers all the time. We're November, December, January, February, and March. 5 months. That's our longest season. And so that's more important than spring. And all we do in the garden center, 90% of the plants that are purchased are spring blooming plants.
Wow.
You come in 1.7 times a year, you buy all the blooming ones. Every garden center makes sure to have bud and bloom for the spring because I know you're not coming back. A true gardener knows that winter, having a nice winter interest like we're talking here today, is what you want to do. That's when you're going to see stuff. That's the most important part. The other stuff's easy. Spring's easy.
Yeah.
Winter's the stuff you have to work on.
Excellent. Okay. All right, Ella, we are back to you.
Okay. Wow. Well, I did bring in a winter blooming perennial that's in my yard. This is Helleborus niger. This is the Christmas rose. And so it's doesn't have a lot of cultivars like the Helleborus orientalis, which is the Lenten rose, which will be blooming early in spring. But this is one in my yard, and it blooms every Christmas, but sometimes if we have really cold temperatures, the buds are damaged. And so this year it stayed practically in the 40s up until Christmas, well, until next week, everyone. They bloomed, and I sent in some pictures, and one thing that I do is I cover this with a clear umbrella, so it goes over the top.
Interesting. Now, how do you secure it?
It's on a post, and I push it down into the ground.
That's really smart.
My husband bought them from some supply company years ago, and I poo-pooed them, but it really does nice to kind of protect this and keeps the winter winds. I mean, it doesn't really insulate it that much when it goes really cold. But
so does the umbrella touch the ground?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah,
so it's like
an umbrella with just a sticky, just push it in.
Yes.
Gotcha. Okay.
It was.
That
it
is
was.
smart.
And the top of the real ones have a handle that you can pull it out. But now I look for clear umbrellas when I'm thrifting, and just because, you know, they don't last forever.
Sure.
Yeah.
But this is just, it's just so beautiful to go out and see something. And you can see that there's just all kinds of little flowers still coming. So it does bloom for a really long period of time. But I don't know if there's really been that much emphasis on cultivars. And of course, in the spring, the bees will be pollinating, and my regular hellebores reseed, you know, all over the place. But because there isn't a lot of insect activity at this time of year, you know, these have never really set viable seed that I've had success with.
Talking about things to look at in the winter, that's perfect.
Yeah.
Okay.
Nice.
Let's go to a question. This is from Diane Armstrong O'Connor. She asks about elephant ears. She said she bought 2 large elephant ears. They're in pots right now in a heated basement. Wants to know if she can leave them in the pots or if they need to be taken out of the soil to overwinter.
Yeah, it's much easier to overwinter them if you have the space in the pot, because they often won't die back, especially if you have a heated, somewhat lit basement. And even if they do, all you need is the main bulb anyway. So it's much easier to keep them in a pot if you have the space. As a matter of fact, if I have them in the yard, I'll dig them up and throw them in a pot and then throw them in the basement, just because I don't want to shake them off and I don't want to start over, because that new growth generally doesn't doesn't go back. So you can still, if it's 5 feet tall, you can keep it 5 feet tall and then have it 6 feet tall if it gets that tall, you know, if it's able to get that. So you can dry them and put them in peat moss and put them in, but that's a whole nother thing. And as we discussed maybe 2 months ago, the LED grow lights are so cheap now. For $30, you can actually have it put on growth on an elephant ear.
I've got a $10 one at my desk, and it keeps my plants alive. I mean, they're just crazy. You can stick them anywhere. They're all over the place.
There's so much of that technology that I feel so old, because you know, I just remember buying the expensive grow lights and building all these things that now I can buy it on Amazon or wherever and stick it in a pot and have things look so nice.
Truly, in the pot.
In
now.
the pot, and every pot has its own little light, and it costs $10, like you said, and to have herbs and. You know, I'm just fascinated that LED lights they've really changed the world, as far as in our world, in plants, and then in the home too. You know, it's just
the future is now.
Yeah, that's right. And it's an expensive future.
I let my elephant ears though dry back, die back.
So you take them out?
No, I leave them in the pot.
Okay, you leave them in the pot.
But they go dormant, because I put them in a back room that has no light.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I have enough houseplants to water that have to stay alive. I don't need to water something and care for something. And so I have some big elephant ears. I have some cocasias and alocasias, and of course the you know, the cannas and all of those kinds of bulbs, and I just let them all go dormant.
They all just need a break. Even give you a break.
Right. I even let my banana tree go dormant.
That's a good. Do you need to periodically? Do those plants need to go dormant? I guess if you're living in a tropical area, they never
Florida
would.
doesn't.
So I just wondered, you know, because some of those they need a break.
Yeah, some of the bulbs, like the tulips and those kind, do need a cold period, and a lot of perennials need that as well. But those are tropicals.
Okay.
Right.
Okay. You've got a couple more items that you
real
brought
quick.
in. We want to get to those.
I want to share a book that I read this winter. I just finished it, How Plants Work, the science behind the amazing things that plants do. This is written by a horticultural professor, Linda Scott, and she lives out in the Pacific Northwest. But I, of course, took some physiology classes while I was here at the University of Illinois getting a horticulture bachelor's degree. But some of the interesting things she talked about is the fallacies that we have, and one is on twining vines. It used to be thought that if we lived in the northern hemisphere, because of the rotation of the earth, the vines twined clockwise. And if you were in the southern hemisphere, the vines twined counterclockwise.
I'd never heard
There's
that.
the Coriolis effect or something, but that does not work for vines. Vines don't read those books. And so what they did is they found out that 90% of the vines go counterclockwise all across the world. And so I decided I was going to go find out, what did I have and how did they twine? And so I brought in, this is a Kebia, and again, a twining vine, that's the way it climbs, and it is counterclockwise. And then I do have some problems with some Japanese honeysuckle, and it happens to twine clockwise. So it was like, wow, I've got one of each. Well, actually I have a whole bunch of other things too, but it was like the clematis, wisteria, some of those different things that are twining. And she explains how the physiology of it all is. And then the other thing that it talked about was some of the colors in the winter foliages as well is anthocyanins. And this is a water-soluble pigment that produces the kind of the purpley red color. These are the ones that are high, you know, you want to eat berries because of antioxidants and all kinds of things. But the plant itself on broadleaf evergreens, I brought a boxwood in, and then this is Mahonia or Oregon grape holly. You see the purpling of the foliage, and this helps to, these pigments in the leaf help to protect the leaf from desiccation, because they can hold the water in the plants, and then in the spring they kind of go back to green.
Interesting.
It was the coolest thing.
That
It was
is
like
cool.
I never.
You see it on your evergreens. It goes to an amber color, like especially your junipers.
Yeah, yeah. A lot of evergreens and broadleaf evergreens can get kind of that purpling, but it was also purpling that we see in some of these overwintering
Wow.
perennial plants, where this helps to protect the cells. The anthocyanins hold the water molecules so that they become super cooled. The water is super cooled and it won't resist freezing. So she gives all these just all kinds of things about how geotropisms and how roots grow down and then how gravity affects and all
I
these
love
different.
the science of it all.
Yeah. It's
That's
neat that people look at that. They
Yes.
look at a vine and say, why does it do
why
that?
does that do that?
And do other vines do
Yes.
that?
Right.
Oh.
And I
So
think it's funny because
90%.
So this and this. So Chicagoland green boxwood, the newer varieties were made to not get that color. So they sell them and they promote them as, we sell this and this is better because it doesn't turn an amber color. It keeps its beautiful green in the winter. And then these other mahonias, there's newer varieties that say, we like this better because it turns purple in the
Yeah.
winter.
So it's
Yeah.
all
And so
about
it just depends
Marketing.
on
preference.
marketing.
Yeah,
on-
exactly.
and do you want it to turn the color or do you not want it to? And so but it's natural to do that.
That's fascinating.
Yeah, it was.
And we're out of time. We could do a whole other 30
Yeah.
minutes, but that is it. I wonder if your seed catalogs are coming in. Mine are. Get your orders in right before they all are all sold out. Thank you guys so much for coming in. Thank you so much for watching. If you've got questions, send them in to us at yourgarden@gmail.com, or you can leave us a message on Facebook or Instagram, and we will see you next time. Good night.